So thank you for inviting me to speak. I'm always happy to talk about the arts, and hopefully I will be quick enough that I'll have an opportunity to answer questions and have a more conversational chat with you before I run and teach period 2, 3, and 4. Basically, I try to model what I teach the boys. So although I don't think any of the boys would have a problem today, I've left all their names off of their work because I didn't ask them for permission. But some of you, and then last night I was like, I didn't ask them for permission, but I don't want to freak them out and say, I'm about to show your work. So, but at least one of you might recognize this room because your son. But anyway, I'm going to show you several works and sort of talk about the tenets that we're working on in the arts as a whole. So yes, I'm the head of senior school arts, but most of the teachers are crossover except for one. So the idea, and certainly some of the stuff we're doing is going to be affecting the junior school, hopefully as we continue on this this path. So I think I'm sort of preaching to the converted in a large way because a lot of you have sons that are in the arts currently. But this work on the screen was made last year by a student who was in grade 10 at the time, and it was a major breakthrough for that student in that normally the boys love to rush through work and say, I'm done. And I leave a lot of time on the schedule for revisions and multiple drafts, and sometimes a boy has to just do a whole new project because they just can't work the same one again. In this case, this is a student who was always rushing through his work, getting a decent grade but not going deep, and it was a major breakthrough to put his work on the screen initially and him to realize that all of the stuff looked too photoshopped, is the word that the kids use. So the big breakthrough happened with, it's actually just a simple fix. He put a yellow filter over everything and turned the opacity down and blended it, and then asked if he could show the class again and see what the feedback would be. And that's exactly what we're trying to foster. So revision and so basically, in a nutshell, one of the reasons that I think the arts are super important is we're teaching students to synthesize seemingly disparate ideas and information and try to make it into a meaningful whole. And this was actually based on art history, so it was a surrealist project. So he was looking at the history of surrealism and then how does it apply today to computers and technology and so forth. So initially, before we got snowed out, I was going to be talking specifically about the upcoming arts night, which has now happened. So I changed my talk slightly, but this is sort of the mantra that we're following in the arts, and it's documentation and display, and essentially what is the difference. And I'm hoping to break some of that difference down. But and when speaking of music and drama, certainly it would be performance is the display aspect, but documentation is something that we as teachers are always doing, and it's how do we get our students to sort of recognize the value of process. And sometimes I've been pushing my older students to actually make their final artworks out of the process, which has been really difficult for them to understand, but they've been sort of pushing through. So we do a lot of formative work, and certainly I teach every boy in grade 9, and it's a battle in grade 9 because formatives do not affect their overall grade. It does at the end. I have a lot of power to use teacher's discretion, and I tell them that, but they are, particularly the grade 9 boys, are obsessed with every time a mark goes in looking at their overall average and how it's affected their overall average. And I keep telling them that has nothing to do with how I graded you. I don't care that it affected your overall average. I'm marking your media work. So it's trying to get them to look at these formative things, and the formative things are a great chance to get feedback and for them to recognize that they're doing something well or they need to work in a certain area. And then when I do grade the final assignment, certainly the application area of the final assignment, those skills I can always help build. I'm at a lack for helping them if they have no ideas. I'm not really great at, I don't know what to do, but I can help you do what you want to do is usually how I try to phrase it. So the idea is to push past the the initial idea and try to make it go deeper. And sometimes that's through multiple drafts. Sometimes it's through failure, and failure is a difficult word. So we maybe phrase it as making mistakes and embracing mistakes. But the one thing I always look for is a student who's curious. If I don't have a curious student, I'm at a loss for that. Meaning that curiosity is probably the thing that we value the most. And I will take a struggling, mediocre student who's curious over a student that thinks they know it all and are getting great grades. So curiosity is something that it looks differently for different students, of course, but usually if it's an upper year student in grade 12 and they're thinking of art school, my first question is, do you make art on your own, or do you wait for me to assign it? So that's what I mean by curious, someone that's always got a camera, a sketchbook, an instrument in their hand, and they're working for themselves. So the idea of failure is one that we try to embrace, and I've had a lot more success with boys understanding failure than I have in the past, but failure is a difficult word. So the idea of failure, it means trying again, and it means there's an opportunity also for play is sometimes the word I use, but what I'm looking for is experimentation. So another issue that comes up when trying to inspire experimentation is how do I get a student to want to experiment? Well, there's a couple of ways. Some boys are natural at experimentation. I will give them Photoshop, which is a really deep program, and I'll be trying to teach them the very, very beginning things, and they'll be, super deep into it, lost, and I'll get pulled over to try to help them. I'll have another student who needs to make every formative grade first and get ahead, and then I'll say, well, now you've done all these things and you can relax because I can grade them all, and now why don't you change the color or play around. So the idea is, how do we get them to experiment, and there isn't a one fix for that, right? Boys learn differently, and that's the best we do. So how does this look in other classes? So a couple of things happened interestingly with Arts Night with music. So music would have rehearsals, practices for a very polished final piece. So I talked specifically to Miss Johnson. I said, well, how can we, for Arts Night, of course, Arts Night also had some weather issues, or the winter concert did, so we ended up mapping the winter concert back onto Arts Night. But initially, when they were going to be separate, Miss Johnson's idea was to allow the boys, and they're mixed grades, so we're looking at, it was basically her grade 11 and 12 class, but including some grade 10s. Can we allow them to do improv? So can they play without music and practice, and it's amazingly freeing, and it was a wonderful experience, but we don't give the boys that opportunity that often. So that was a big point. So I don't know how many people caught it, but they were over here in Seale, and the acoustics were amazing. They're playing in the Guild Room, right? So it was really quite marvelous to see, and that was specifically Miss Johnson saying, let's look at this process and somehow put it on display. Another thing that she did that was really amazing was she had in the junior school a student conduct, which was a lot of work, and so she's really good at sort of flipping the classroom and is really on board with a lot of the ideas that we're trying to go across the board. Doc Newton also did really great things in drama for this idea, because drama is normally, obviously performance-based. He worked on a unit directing for the camera, and I wasn't sure how this was going to play out at Arts Night because the videos were really long and we didn't have a huge window, but he kind of was his own YouTube player, and he sat in a C House 202, and when a parent came in, they'd be like, oh, your son is in this piece, and he would play it. And it's a really different look for drama, and the boys learned how to act for the camera and how to get retakes and things like that and different angles, and that was very successful, I thought. So that's kind of what we're looking at across the board. This is just another work that came out of a boy's skill, a boy's natural skill, but this was really a collaborative process in a sense from the critique that happened in class. So one of the tenets in this assignment was it had to have original photography in it, and the original photography in this work is a long exposure photo of Lake Ontario. So you can see this sort of hazy sort of horizon line. And another student looked at it and said, it feels like there's a face there, which I didn't see. And then the artist himself found this skull image and took that scenario. So it actually came from a very open space of critique and discussion, and he went back to the drawing board and built this piece from that. So the idea is that we do have this opportunity that I'm not the only expert in the room, right? So we're really trying to have boys help each other and boys critique each other. This is an image from our first arts night, and it was, I sort of decided that every single boy in the school who was in the senior school who was taking art would have at least one work up, and it meant for a lot of printing and hanging. And in this case, it's certainly more display oriented than documentation, in that there isn't a lot of explanation, and the boys actually chose, for the most part, the pieces that they wanted to go up. And then it's really, really important. When I started here 3 years ago, we didn't have an arts night yet, and most schools do, and it's just very healthy to get work up on the walls so boys can get that feedback. And we have some really great faculty here who will go seek out the boy and say, I really saw your work and I liked it, and it means the world to those boys. So I always try to direct people to make sure that the compliments, and the boys hopefully will be tough enough to take critique too, but usually it's compliments that come back to them. But the idea that their work has been seen and valued by somebody, whether it's a drama performance, a music performance, or an artwork, right? So the idea is that we are trying our best to put the work out there and build the confidence. And it's not easy work. It's not an easy school to find space to hang things, but it's important work. I took this is sort of a funny slide. I blurred out the name. This was a very recent, this is what a Google Drive folder looks like, and this was me asking the boys to turn in something just before March break. And I wasn't planning to look at it over the March break, but if you can, I'll just read some of it out. So it has an MP4, which is a video file. It has the Premiere sort of edit decision list file. Then it has draft 2, draft 1, and other versions, and every photo the child used, right? So this is somebody that recognized that I wanted process, right? And one of the dangers of sort of pushing the conceptual stuff on the guys is that the final works might not be the best portfolio piece. And sometimes it's the drafts and the raw stuff that's important, and the boys by grade 11 and 12 are finally realizing I have to save everything, and thankfully Google Drive is virtually limitless, and they're able to leave all their works, and we can go back to grade 10 and grade 9 and find those works when we need to put a portfolio together. And I think the day is coming when portfolios are not going to just be for art school, because we are frankly running out of marks, right? The marks are way up in the 90s, and there's going to have to be something to differentiate your child from another child. So portfolios are going to start making the rounds. They are in the States already into other fields. So it's important that we hold on to this stuff. And it doesn't work in grade 9 yet to get them to turn their work in like this, but they're starting to recognize, and I was really happy when I saw this. I wasn't happy to look at it all and mark it, but I was happy that it was done like this.
That would have been the process from the whole year. Like
No, that was just for unit 2 that we were finishing.
but the date
Oh.
modified, like he would have just looked at each folder.
He created that folder in class. They were all, so the date modified, that was just what he put in. I'm like, can you guys just turn in stuff before the March break so I can see it and see how you're progressing? I try not to make things I try not to give them homework over the March break, but we're going to go into critiques after the March break. And I just wanted to make sure that everybody had something on the go. So that was literally all one day's worth of stuff. Yeah, and that's the other good thing. The tracking in a Google Doc is amazing. I can go back and see, when the file was created, and, it dates it for me and things like that. So just a couple of quotes that I really like. The top guy's a cartoonist. Scott Adams is a cartoonist, and creativity is allowing yourself to make mistakes. Art is knowing which ones to keep. So the idea that mistakes aren't bad. They're actually risk-taking and trying things. And then John Dewey is probably my favorite education theorist. Failure is instructive. The person who really thinks learns quite as much from his failures as he does through his successes. And that's something that hopefully by grade 12 the boys understand. It's a tough one for them. They just want to have the most polished, pretty piece. A text that I use, these are all writings by curators and artists, and it's a book called Failure. So it's just, Rodin says, he who is discouraged after failure is not a real artist. So again, I'm trying to get them to hold on to these things that they think are failures and maybe revisit them as they go through. Now, my March break reading, I'll just put on the screen. It's a pretty interesting text that I'm working through, and it's due to frustration. So this is MIT Press. So they publish some of the best art books I find, but this book is called The Art of Failure, an essay on the pain of playing video games. And one of the issues, besides curiosity, that we had was like doggedness. Like boys just aren't going through the steps. Like they're just doing the bare minimum and turning it in. I'm like, where's the multiple drafts? Why are they, and then it dawned on me that video games aren't actually fun. They're actually pretty painful. Like you die consistently and restart. And so I'm working my way through this book in hopes of trying to instill that, because we know they have that skill. We know that they can easily pick themselves up and start again. And that's kind of what we're trying to teach them. And this little essay is about that idea that, so when we turn around and say, these boys are just doing the bare minimum, they don't seem to well, they actually have this skill set. We just have to figure out how to tap into it. Right? So that's, this is a quote by me, I think. It ended up in an article in a publication, and I was being quoted, and it sounds like something I would say, so it's terribly arrogant to Google yourself too when you're preparing something, but so I said, if we want our students to believe that they are artists, it's important to give them a venue to make them feel that way. And this year, Miss Mladen, our new visual and media teacher, went to Steve and said, hey, can the boys paint in this stairwell? And I had never even been in the stairwell. I didn't know it existed. It's this little mini stairwell from the 3rd floor in Seale House to the 2nd. And this is a grade 10 class, and it was a brilliant move to get the boys up and out of the room. And they took a real sense of pride in painting this. So we actually did Arts Night in Seale House specifically so we could have a path for people to walk through and see the work. And the guys wrote these really great reflections on, what it was like to have people look at their work. And if you saw this class, it was a pretty interesting class, to say the least. So she is also very, very big, and it was one of the big questions in her interview was about display specifically, and how can we keep showing more work. So she's been pretty dogged at hanging and framing works. I'm less about putting stuff in a frame than she is. Like, I'll just stick my stuff on the wall with tape, but she puts everything in a frame and goes through so it's so this is just some pictures of her around the school, and some of the changes that she's trying to bring forward. And then interestingly, you never really know where the collaborations are going to come from. And we are basically open to collaborate with anybody, right? So I try not to say no to any project that is proposed. And so there's a quote by Olafur Eliasson as well, saying that the artist is a participant and a co-producer of reality. I do not see the artist as a person who sits at a distance and evaluates. So the idea that this is an artist who happens to work a lot in science, for example. So the reason I use that quote is I did a project in my class with Emma Totten last year, and it was based on a course she was taking on experiential learning. And she came to me and said, is there sort of a project that you might want to work on with your students and me, and I can write on it for my course? And we looked at the portrait. And initially, it was going to be a collaboration with one of our seniors' homes. And Emma took it to her class, and the class critiqued it and said, no, that's kind of limiting, the idea that every student gets married to the same sort of. So we started looking at challenging what a portrait means. This was a student who did a typical portrait of his mom's face and his dad's face, but he also brought this one in, and he said, does a portrait have to be a face? And I said, absolutely not. It doesn't have to be a face. So, and what was interesting about this piece, not only I helped him with contrast and texture and all that kind of stuff, and it's a brilliant photograph to start with, but Emma was in my classroom, and she brought out a side that I didn't even think to ask. And it was a question about the hands, and he said, this is my aunt and my grandmother, and I wanted my grandmother to be the one holding my aunt's hand to sort of flip the script and show that support and it was like a really deep, interesting answer that I was so happy to hear, but it didn't come out of anything that I'd said to him. I'd been too busy trying to work on it, so it was really nice having Emma's line of questioning in there. So that's why these collaborations, I think, are really, really important. More sort of process work. So in the grade 9 class, they made body sculptures, and it took the entire class to make 2, right? So they had to collaborate, and we're not firing a kiln here, but she managed to put lights in them and have them outside during arts night, right? So they made bodies. In my class, we were studying aperture, and this was a grade 9 class at the time, and we were looking at how to blur out the background and keep the subject in focus. And those little circles in the background are called bokeh. The newest iPhone does bokeh. And the boys were saying to me, how do I get that effect? And I went outside, and they were taking a picture of a water bottle on the turf. And I said, why don't you think about what you have at hand? It'd be a lot easier, because it's better if the camera's higher, hint, hint. And next thing you know, they realized that they had each other, and they could say, can you move 2 steps backwards? And they were looking at the moment right when the focus stopped, and he had him, so it was a collaboration between 3 boys to get this image, and it looks as professional as a Tom Stevens photo, right? It was they figured it out, though. I just hinted at what they were supposed to do, and then other forms of photography lend themselves to experimentation quite naturally, right? So this was a long exposure, and I actually build into the course long exposure. I give them an extra week of just playing with it, because it's the one thing that they sort of all engage in, and it's the one time that I know they're experimenting, because they're not getting the results that they expect. It's sort of magic, right? So the shutter stays open, and they're in the dark, and they don't really see the image till they look back on the camera. So the last couple of images I'm going to show are just some certain perseverance. So this was also a boy who was in grade 9 last year in my class, and this is about the 50th draft. I kid you not, he just kept adding the subtlest changes and saving everything, and and literally sometimes I'm just at my desk, and there's a lineup of kids asking me how to fix this, how to do that. This boy doesn't notice, and he just drops his computer on top of everybody else's, he sits right in front of me so I can see his screen, and he asks me lots of questions, but he was very proud of this image, and it's amazing, that he created it in grade 9, and just really did the things that professional artists do. Because one of the issues that we have is artists never show their process. We go to the galleries and we see the final work. We don't know how many iterations it took. Advertisers don't show that either, right? Advertisers might have 100 drafts of a commercial that the kids all know, but we don't know that there was 99 left out, and they just want to know why they're not making the final every time. This was another huge success for me. This was my first year teaching here, and it was this time of year, after March break. The weather's starting to get nice, and again, I built into the unit a lot of extra time. And my students finished a very flat design. This was a gig poster. It was supposed to be a gig poster that used graphic design, typography, and it had to have a date and information that had to be conveyed. And I turned to him and said, we have 3 to 4 more classes. I want to see more drafts of this. And I think he was playing a video game even. He was really, really not interested in doing the work. And eventually, I kept coming around to him, and he made 8 drafts and taught himself, I don't know if you can see back there, but this turned into a record. It has all the grooves on it, and he figured out how to type on a path, and he made this excellent design, and he got, a high 90 on it, and was a kid that was in the 60s and realized, if I put this extra effort in, and he's a kid that I still teach today in grade 12. So he's stuck with the program and actually transferred in after thinking, media is not for me, but recognizing that he had to do these drafts. Another student who did multiple drafts and went well above and beyond what I'd asked to do. This was, they were looking at art history and finding a piece to appropriate and copy. And this is a Dutch original painting, and he used his bedroom window. I don't know how dangerous this was, but a lot of sort of Photoshop and planning and lighting. Sometimes I just don't ask the questions of what happens outside of class when I'm happy with the work. And then just lastly, to finish the two things that I think across the board we're trying to do in the arts, and I hope to involve junior school as well in future arts nights. So it's certainly, as we try to get bigger, we're starting small right now, but process is super important, and process is really about experience. It's about the experience they have when creating, really. And if there's an excellent byproduct, great, but the end product isn't the primary focus that I'm grading, right? So I'm trying to get them to recognize that. And then for failure, students must recognize that success doesn't come easy. Sometimes it does. Sometimes the first thing you do, just like in math, sometimes you can hammer out the problem, but other times you have to work at it. But failure is not the end, or a sign to give up. And there isn't shame in it. I mean, we all fail through things, and then one learns from these failings, and that's the sort of things that across the board we're trying to instill. And that is my last slide. So I will leave that on the screen so you can remember my 2 points.
Anyone have any questions? Oh,
Yes.
Claire? Okay, yeah, absolutely. I have 1,000 questions, but I'm going to pick one of them. When the boys get up to grade 11 and 12, and they're all jumping on the STEM bandwagon, and I want to be a doctor, I need sciences, I need engineering, blah, 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 how do you keep arts in their life when they're making their course selections? Is there an opportunity for clubs? Do they still come out at grade 12?
Yeah, I mean, that's a major important question, I would say. There isn't clubs do exist, but really to make a polished art piece, they need to be putting the effort and the multiple drafts in. So one thing I can say that is our greatest strength is we run small classes, and we're willing to run a senior class of 7 students, for example, and quite frequently my upper classes, even if I had 18, we'll split them. So there's 2 slots in the timetable, so we can. It's hard to explain sometimes to parents that I'm teaching both 11s and 12s, and I promise that I'm giving attention to your boys, but we do it so the timetable is freed up, because if there's 2 slots to take it. So the toughest one, I think, is arts against arts. Like if you're a musician and a visual artist, we are working on that. Like I've had many talks about, even in grade 9 right now, that we refer to one of the periods as the arts period, and we're looking next year as not having that as an option, because we had a boy come in this year who was literally a triple threat. He wanted to do drama, visual, and vocal, and band. Actually, he was a very interesting student, and he was willing to take a summer course, and then we had to reach out to him and say a summer course isn't going to help because these courses all conflict with one another, right? So that definitely happens in the lower grades. In the upper grades, we're trying to open them up and leave enough flex. Although our timetable is built on what the boys are choosing now, we will counsel them in. And I think I'm really happy for a boy that gets into art school, but I'm also equally upset for someone that doesn't do well at university. So we want to set them up for success. So when we find out someone's going even into liberal arts, it's important to make sure they're in courses that they're getting, writing, they're using this side of the brain, and they're doing critical thinking and things like that. So we will try to counsel them in, provided that there's a slot. So it is difficult, and they are spoiled for choice. So there isn't a really great answer to that, but it's something that we're definitely aware of, and I think it's going to take the known and loved aspect of us recognizing a grade 10 that is probably going into the arts and trying to counsel them into taking all the right courses. But with the STEM engineering angle, sciences are important too. So trying to find that balance is going to be a huge issue, but it's one we're aware of. So.
What arts do the boys take in grade 9?
Okay, so in grade 9, my course, and it was one of the big selling features for me to come here, my course is a mandatory course. So I teach every grade 9 boy a half-year credit. And in grade 9, your choices are you're either in vocal or band. And if you're not in those two, actually next year it's the first time we're changing this. You have a choice over all your visual and all your drama. Right now it's a split between the two, but as of next year, and I haven't seen the numbers yet because the boys coming in next year are just choosing their courses right now. But so you have a chance to sort of start. One of the things we're looking at is prerequisites as well to make sure that we have the opportunity to, like, I didn't take art in high school. I was in a gifted music program, and back then there was a clash against taking visual and taking music, and I didn't switch till partway through university, and so it's sort of been a bee in my bonnet to make sure that they don't, they're not against one another, that it is possible to take them. So we are looking at ways to deal with the ministry's prereqs and allow council boys in. So, yeah.
So on that, sorry, they take that art component in grade 9, vocal or band, or visual and drama.
Yeah.
And so someone had mentioned to me, and again, I think it'll be coming down the pipe, my office is in grade 7, that you can take, like through edu-travel or these courses, you can take your geography and your history in the summers with or each of those to keep both of these options open.
Yes,
So
so we definitely have a few boys that take their history in the summer between 9 and 10 so they can free up an extra slot. If what I'm saying happens and we don't have the art block anymore, it could happen between grade 8 and 9, but it didn't work this year for the student that wanted to do that because all of those courses ran in the same time. Right, so
there might be a possibility to do the geography between 8 and 9.
Yeah, it would be rare.
Yeah.
And I would say most of our guys are, sorry, Greg,
No, it's okay. Yeah.
And, most of them would, if they wanted to do the two arts, they would do one as a co-curricular, which is usually the drama, right? We have a school play, which they can do. Alternately, they would take the art as the extracurricular weekend or whatever. I don't know that we've had a boy do the geography before grade 9.
that's what the boy tried to do this year, and we found out that it wasn't going to help him.
It was someone at St. Michael's Stupid.
Okay, so another, what I would say, something that we've had success with this year is counseling. Like, let's say he was really torn between drama and band, and we put him in the band class, but he was in the play, and then he was getting into grade 11, and he was going the humanities route. We could meet with the drama teacher, and the drama teacher could give him a reading, and then we could admit him into the grade 11 class, even though he didn't.
My question is, we're not being torn between the two if you haven't had the exposure to it.
Yeah.
I know you're interested in it.
It's
So
true.
We're trying to keep all options open to
Exactly.
a young person who really doesn't know if they like everything.
Yeah, I hear you. I think that's the biggest battle, and it's something that we're constantly meeting about. Is the best I could say. We're trying to find a way to make sure that this branch of the arts is available, and it's a small school, right? So we compete against everything. But
we've also brought drama back into the junior school, which
Yeah.
we've been doing the last couple of years as well. That's something that Greg's on the lead. So the boys typically were making a decision for drama in grade 9, having not really been exposed to it very much in the junior school. So unless they did the play. So Chris Newton's teaching now drama to the 7s and 8s. So hopefully they've had the vocal, the instrumental, the drama, and the visual. So at least they're making an informed.
yeah, and that's why we made this switch this year, because the reasons that we split visual and drama was because they weren't exposed to drama. And now that they are, we're like, they can. This is our first year of trying it. Can they make a decision? We'll see, and we'll also, again, the benefits of a small school is we've got a lot of flex in terms of your son will be known, and we can counsel in and out of a course is not too different than being at university and finding out by Thanksgiving that you're not really made to be an engineer and you want to switch majors. Like, we'd have those personal meetings and help counsel him into the place that he's most comfortable. Yeah.
This is my last one.
It's okay.
Do you have
I only have to
to work collaboratively with the teachers of other subjects, say like the STEM subjects, to do, like, bring an arts element into the study of history, music, into the study of science?
Yeah, I would say, that's something that I'm all for. I would say the most difficult to collaborate with are largely math and science in the younger grades, because they have so many markers to meet in the year that, back to sort of mistakes or experimentation, like in the arts, if I just put my head down, I can meet all the markers for the Ontario credit in a month. Science and math can't. So I can try a project that essentially fails and lose a week of class. They can't afford that. So I've sort of approached it in the opposite way, in that I presented to all the senior school faculty last year showing grade 9 work, knowing that I'm one of the few people that teaches every grade 9 boy. So I showed the teachers, these are the skill sets that grade 9 boys have. So if you want to, in grade 10, design a poster in Illustrator for your history class, these boys have that skill. And I'm available to help them at certain times of the year. It's like I don't want to get caught doing French homework for the boys, but I also want to show them that this stuff exists across the board. And one of the best things that we have going for us right now is the software, the Adobe Suite, which I introduced them to the 4 key programs in it. It is now every boy in the senior school has it, and as of starting next year, I will have taught every boy in the senior school except for the ones that come in new in grade 10 or 11 or whatever. But we now, it used to be a really, really expensive program, and they've just been trying to fit it into educational budgets of high schools. So we just give it to every kid in the senior school. So they will have access to the software throughout, even if the teachers don't know. So I've had Rick has just come to me and said, we want to design a logo. I don't know what things to ask for, and I've given him a rubric, and I've gone and done a presentation on what makes a good logo and things like that with all boys that I've already taught at that point. So they do have some skills. But I'm happy to collaborate myself. I think I have the flex in my schedule to do so. It's just finding the willing other teacher.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting.